Want to learn a bit more about Banquo? Want to learn some key quotes and a bit of character analysis? Stay tuned. Banquo doesn't actually say that much in the whole play. I read somewhere that he only speaks 33 times in the entire play, which seems about right. And to be fair, he does die halfway through though, so he doesn't actually get that much time to talk. He is spoken about in quite a few scenes, but in terms of scenes that he's actually in, you've got Act 1 Scene 3, where Banquo and Macbeth meet the witches. That's probably his biggest scene. He's in Act 1 Scenes 4 and 6, where he speaks very briefly. Act 2 Scene 1, he has a chat with Macbeth just before the dagger speech. Briefly in Act 2 Scene 3 when they find Duncan's body. And then he expresses his suspicions at the start of Act 3, and he dies in Act 3 Scene 3. And that's it. That's every scene that Banquo speaks in. So what do you actually talk about if you get a question on Banquo? Say you get a nice vague question like, how is Banquo presented? Let's look at 4 different ways. First off, we've got Banquo as Macbeth's foil. A foil is a character who contrasts with another character in order to expose or accentuate certain characteristics. So, Macbeth and Banquo start off as great friends, but their characters juxtapose during the play. The reason for this is that they both start off as noblemen with great reputations as fierce warriors. They both meet the witches together, so far they're pretty similar. But after the witches' predictions and their temptations, they both start to take different paths. Banquo decides to let fate take its course, whereas Macbeth decides to force fate's hand and steal the crown through murder. It could be said that Banquo exists to show the path that Macbeth could have taken. So the captain sings both of their praises to King Duncan in Act 1 Scene 2. He gives a little speech about how well both Macbeth and Banquo fought, and essentially how the battle was won because of how well they fought. The captain cements their reputation to the audience and also to the king, and as an audience, we haven't met them yet, but we already expect them to be fierce warriors. When walking back from the battle, the witches show up. Banquo has the most to say initially. He seems sceptical, almost mocking the witches, talking about their beards and their skinny lips. But when the witches speak and hail Macbeth as king, Banquo says that Macbeth seems rapt withal, meaning he's hooked, he's totally absorbed, he's spellbound. But contrast that to Banquo, who says, "Speak then to me, who neither beg nor fear your favour nor your hate," which basically translates to, if you really can see into the future, make me a prediction. I'm not bothered about whether you like me or hate me. Now that's quite a different reaction to Macbeth. Banquo also asks way more questions about the witches than Macbeth here. He's definitely a skeptic. Then the witches give Banquo some predictions. Lesser than Macbeth and greater. Not so happy yet much happier. They compare Macbeth and Banquo and juxtapose them against each other for the audience. We also get a glimpse into the witches and their manipulative ways. Banquo ends up the better man, even though he isn't king. So he is lesser than Macbeth in status, but he's a greater person. And also the paranoia corrupts Macbeth's mind by the end of the play, so Banquo is much happier than Macbeth, even if he isn't super happy himself. And we then see Macbeth's fascination with "stay you imperfect speakers." He wants more from the witches, more information, he's hooked. But Banquo initially thinks they've taken something that made them hallucinate when he mentions eating the insane root. He then realises that the witches are instruments of darkness, and they're not to be trusted. He says that they tell us truths to win them over, but will end up betraying them in the long run. This is a lesson that Macbeth doesn't learn until it's far too late in Act 5. The main difference, and the bit that tips Macbeth over the edge, is the witches' final prediction for Banquo. They say, "Thou shalt get kings, though thou be none." So basically, Banquo's descendants will become kings even if Banquo doesn't become one himself. Now this is Shakespeare's nod to the real-life King James I, whose ancestor was a guy called Banquo. The fictional witch's prophecy came true on that one. That also pops up in Act 4 Scene 1, when the show of 8 kings comes out with a cauldron. Anyway, Banquo's descendants becoming king really starts to play on Macbeth's mind, and he realises what's the point in everything him and Lady Macbeth have done if they can't pass on the crown to their children. He says he has a fruitless crown and a barren sceptre. They can't have children. This makes him a bit jealous of Banquo, and this juxtaposition leads to Macbeth's plot to murder Banquo and his son Fleance. Which leads us onto the last foil quotation pairing. Macbeth starts his downward spiral. After meeting the witches and deciding that he will force the hand of fate and murder King Duncan, he sets off his tragic hero arc, and he goes from being noble Macbeth to dying as a tyrant, evil. Whereas the antithesis of this, Banquo starts off as noble Banquo, and he dies as noble Banquo too, after deciding not to act on the witch's prophecies, not to give in to temptation, and just letting fate take its course. Shakespeare's message here could be to teach the audience that everyone will be tempted by evil at various points in their life, but to resist it is the noble path. Now, speaking of noble Banquo, let's consider ways that Banquo is shown as noble. Yes, he's a nobleman in terms of rank, but he's also noble in terms of his personality, meaning he's a good person with moral principles. In Act 1, Scene 4, Duncan has a few of his nobles round to praise their roles in the battle, and also to settle the matter of succession. He heaps praise onto Macbeth, talking about all the rewards that Macbeth deserves, and then he turns to Banquo and he says, "Noble Banquo, that hast no less deserved." So first of all, he gives him the epithet of Noble Banquo, a little nickname almost that tells us a lot about Banquo's reputation. And then he says that Banquo is just as deserving of the praise that has been heaped onto Macbeth, because Banquo fought just as hard and just as well. Banquo is made out to be someone that the audience should like and respect. And Duncan uses a few gardening metaphors and talks about planting and growing his men, and Banquo responds with, "There if I grow, the harvest is your own." He's essentially swearing loyalty to the king, but also implying that if the king rewards him, he will work hard for the king, a mutual benefit sort of thing. Worthy Banquo is another epithet that Duncan gives him. And in Act 2, Banquo talks about the nightmares that are haunting him, and he does a little prayer calling on the merciful powers to help him get rid of the nightmares. Now we can guess that the nightmares are about the witches because of a quotation he says later on, but the fact that he prays to God for help when he's in need tells us a lot about him. He's a Christian, and we learn a lot about his character and why he's so good and noble as a person. Contrast that with Macbeth, who in the very next scene loses his relationship with God when he could not pronounce Amen. And the last one for showing Banquo as an all-round good guy is, "Keep my bosom franchised and allegiance clear, I shall be counselled." This is taken just before the dagger speech. Macbeth says to Banquo, "If you follow me, I'll make it worth your while." And Banquo's reply is about how he will follow Macbeth as long as he doesn't lose any honour in doing so, but also that he wishes to remain loyal to the king, which is more than Macbeth can say. We've already talked about how Macbeth and Banquo both react to the witches when the witches are directly in front of them. But what about later? And how does he react to the other plot points in the play? In Act 2, Scene 1, Banquo tells Macbeth that he dreamt last night of the three weird sisters. This could tell us that maybe Banquo isn't as innocent as we think. Maybe the witches and their predictions have been playing on his mind, and although he may act all noble and righteous, some deep part of him is clearly tempted by what the witches have to offer him. So much so that it's affecting his sleep, sort of similar to how Macbeth's sleep is affected. So some part of him is tempted by the instruments of darkness, but unlike Macbeth, he is able to resist the pull towards the dark side. In fact, he even goes as far as confessing his nightmares to God. He says, "A heavy summons lies like lead upon me, and yet I would not sleep. Merciful powers, restrain in me the cursed thoughts that nature gives way to in repose." This is sort of a little prayer, kind of a "God give me strength to fight the evil that visits me in my sleep." Maybe it's this relationship with God that saves Banquo from making a tragic flaw or mistake that would lead to his own downfall. And as Act 3 opens, the Macbeths have the crown, and Banquo begins to suspect that Macbeth has committed an evil act to help himself to the crown. And Banquo says, "Thou has it now, King, Cawdor, Glamis, all, as the weird women promised, and I fear thou playedst most foully for it." So he thinks that Macbeth might have killed the much-loved King Duncan, who they all swore loyalty towards in Act 1, Scene 4, thereby committing regicide, one of the ultimate sins. He suspects that Macbeth might have disrupted the great chain of being, might have changed the course of the country that they all fought so hard to protect at the start of Act 1. He suspects all of this, and what does he do? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. In fact, he even speaks to Macbeth and says, "Let your highness command upon me," just giving in to Macbeth. And we need to ask ourselves, why does Banquo do nothing? What could possibly be the reason for this inaction? The conclusion that I've come to is that he secretly wishes the witches' prophecies to come true. So he doesn't want to rock the boat and change the course of fate. If the prophecies came true for Macbeth, then maybe they'll come true for him as well. He even mentions about the witches setting him up in hope. So we could conclude that maybe Banquo isn't as noble as everyone makes him out to be. Maybe he, just like everyone else, also has a dark side. He is also tempted, which I guess makes him a bit more relatable. Finally, we've got Banquo as a man who is feared, mainly by Macbeth. Now in Act 3, Scene 1, Macbeth gives a little speech, a soliloquy, and he says, "To be thus is nothing, but to be safely thus. Our fears in Banquo stick deep, and in his royalty of nature reigns that which would be feared." Here, he's saying, what's the point in being king unless you're safe and secure as king? And you know who the biggest threat to this is? Banquo. Banquo is the one to watch and the one to fear, and Macbeth points out that this is because of Banquo's royalty of nature. I think here, Macbeth is pointing out that he realises the path that Banquo chose was the right one. Banquo holds the moral high ground, and Macbeth fears this. It's interesting that Macbeth says here, our fears stick deep, and not my fears stick deep, almost as if he's speaking on behalf of the Macbeths. But Lady Macbeth doesn't know anything of the murder of Banquo. Macbeth tells his wife, "Be innocent of the knowledge, dearest Chuck," suggesting that Banquo's murder is the turning point in the relationship of the Macbeths. In the same speech, but a little later, Macbeth says, "There is none but he whose being I do fear, and under him my genius is rebuked." Macbeth knows that Banquo is a morally strong character, and also that he's smart enough to figure out how Macbeth rose to power. This makes Banquo a threat to Macbeth, and therefore it makes sense in Macbeth's mind to eliminate the threat of Banquo. With Banquo being the ultimate threat to Macbeth, and with it being clear to Macbeth as well as the audience that he and Banquo set out on the same path, but diverged, it makes sense that it's Banquo's ghost that haunts Macbeth, and not King Duncan's. It's almost like Banquo represents what Macbeth could have had if he let fate take its course. And this manifests itself when Macbeth sees Banquo's ghost in Act 3, Scene 4. The ghost is the manifestation of Macbeth's guilt at how he gave in to the temptation of evil and forced the hand of fate. This is reflected in "Thou canst not say I did it, never shake thy gory locks at me." This suggests that Banquo's ghost is shaking its head at Macbeth, almost disapproving of the actions that Macbeth took. So is that Banquo shaking his head? Or is it Macbeth's vision shaking its head, suggesting that somewhere deep down, Macbeth actually disapproves of his own actions? He knows they're wrong. And is Macbeth talking about how he didn't kill Banquo because it was the murderers who actually killed him? Or is he saying that he didn't play most foully for it? Either way, Macbeth's paranoia and guilty conscience get the better of him, and it's this display of madness that is the start of his downfall. By seeing Banquo's ghost at the feast and talking about it so openly, Macbeth seals his fate, and his lords begin to turn on him from this point forward. In a way, by killing Banquo and getting paranoid about the murder, Scotland is saved, because Macbeth's days become numbered and the clock is ticking until Malcolm becomes the true king once again. Is it this final display from Banquo that scares Macbeth into becoming Black Macbeth, the tyrant, the hellhound? Possibly. So what's the purpose of Banquo overall? It seems that Banquo was constructed to demonstrate the path that Macbeth could have gone on, to demonstrate the noble path for those who don't give in to temptation, almost like providing a role model for the audience. And also, Shakespeare was given legitimacy to the real-life King James I, by inferring the real Banquo's descendants were fated to become king. Additionally, the real-life Banquo actually helped kill King Duncan, according to the history books, so Shakespeare cleaned him up a bit and made him way more religious, righteous, and noble for the benefit of James I. No one wants to find out their ancestor is a traitor. Now here's an exam-style question if you want to have a go at using these quotations and analyses to answer a question about Banquo. The extract is from where Macbeth and Banquo meet the witches in Act 1, Scene 3. If you want to have a go at that, pause the video and crack on. And if not, thanks for watching and happy revising.